Hello, wrong thinkers. Hello, Jamie, Pirate, Dion, Adam. I see you guys. Robert. Hello, Davina. Sorry, I'm a little late. I appreciate your patience with me. This is a live episode of Kerfuffy Break on Deprogrammed with Keri Smith, and today is Friday, October 6th, one of the best months of the year. And I hope you're having a great Friday, getting ready to head into a great weekend. And I'm excited to hang out with you guys for the next hour or two. I do have a special guest joining us in the second hour. Hold on, I gotta take my boots off. I just came running in. Um, I have a special guest joining us in the second hour. She's been on the show before. Her name is Deb Filman. She is the host of The Reason We Learn, which is a podcast all about education, parents' rights, parents taking control of their children's education, and about exposing what's going on in the public schools. And she's going to be joining us in the second hour to talk about some of the topics that we're discussing in the first hour. So stick around if you want to hear from her. She wants to talk about how some of this stuff plays out in schools, some of the things we're going to be discussing. First of all, thank you. If you joined us Wednesday night, we were on the road again. My husband and I were with family, and we did a pop culture episode Wednesday night. And it was all spooky because I was at my mother-in-law's house, and she is the best decorator. And so everything was Halloween themed. And Wednesday night, Mystery Chris and I, for our pop culture show, which is weekly on Wednesday nights, we did an episode about cults in film, not cult films, but cults in film. And that was a lot of fun. So check it out if you haven't seen it. Monday, I put out an interview, a live interview with Josh Slocum, who is the host of the Deprogrammed, who's the host of the Disaffected podcast. It's those words live in the same place in my brain. Deprogrammed, disaffected. He's the host of the Disaffected podcast, which is a podcast that deals in social justice ideology, woke ideology, and cluster B personality disorders. So viewing woke ideology through the lens, viewing everything crazy that's happening in the world today through the lens of cluster B personality disorders, and using an understanding of those disorders to help understand how this ideology functions, how it functions in society. So that was an amazing interview. I had so much fun talking with him. It had been a while since we had talked. So I recommend you checking it out if you haven't yet. Thank you, Pirate. There's the link in the chat. And there have been several other people now. You know, Josh Slocum of Disaffected has been banging this drum for a few years now, talking about how we can better understand woke ideology if we better understand personality disorders. And now there are several other people who are talking about the same thing. And so I think there's that there seems to be this consensus emerging that it's really helpful to understand these personality disorders if you want to understand how the ideology functions better. So I know Chris Rufo put out a piece about it, about cluster B and woke. Michael Schellenberger and Peter Boghossian put out a piece about it. And so I would definitely recommend checking out all of those pieces and check out Josh Slocum at Disaffected. Okay. John says cluster B makes the world make so much more sense now. It does. It does. It's once you understand, because the thing is about cluster B, about personality disorders, and those are, you know, narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. Those, once you understand those a little bit better, it's easier to understand the people in your life who, or people that you've met who maybe you were like, that person's crazy, but you didn't know how to put it into words. Or, you know, the way that person behaves is insane. It's not like a normal person. I don't understand them. I don't understand what's happening. So learning about those disorders can help you with those difficult people that you may encounter, those difficult individuals. But Josh argues, and I argue, I agree with him, that it can also help you understand how the ideology functions, because on a large scale, it functions a lot like someone with a personality disorder. If you understand projection when it comes to an individual, you can better understand projection when it comes to ideology. If you understand gaslighting when it comes to an individual or manipulation, you can better understand it when it comes to the media, when it comes to political figures, and it helps to explain. It helps make sense of that feeling of like, there's so many people. We're supposed to walk on eggshells around now, and it helps you better understand that feeling that up is down and down is up now, and I know a lot of people when they're first waking up, they're like, is this just me? That's how I felt 2016, 2017. I was like, am I the only person noticing this? Is something wrong with the way people are behaving? It's not just you, and understanding these disorders can help you better understand what's going on. I fully believe that. So, let's see. I've got a couple things to cover before Deb gets here. One of them is, oh, well, thank you. First of all, in the chat, artist Natasha, loved your show with Josh Slocum. When you were on his show the very first time, it was a godsend to me. That's been a while now. Yeah, I was, I don't know if it was his second or third episode, but if you go back to the beginning of his podcast, I did an interview with, he interviewed me on his show. That's been a few years now, but I'm glad it was helpful, and I'm sorry for whatever you were or are dealing with. So I think I wanted to start with this because this is in the news a lot. And although I'm not sure if it is in the mainstream news. I'm not sure if people on the left have heard about it yet, but probably because I've seen a lot of mainstream outlets covering it, which is a little surprising to me. This activist who was killed earlier this week in New York City. So I've got a tweet pulled up here from Jack Posobiec. And the video has been edited to blur out the violent part. So you're not going to see the stabbing, thankfully. So don't worry about that if you haven't seen this yet. What I'm most interested in is this beginning part. Now, to put this in context, the person that you see here in the security cam footage, he was horrifically murdered. It was at 4 a.m. in New York, in Brooklyn. He and his girlfriend were coming home from a wedding, and you can see them sitting here on a park bench, and you see this guy walk by. This is how it starts. And so let me just play this again. Don't worry, you're not going to see the actual stabbing. And then he and his girlfriend get up and start heading towards the guy at 4 a.m. Like, and now you can see they didn't wait very long for him to move on in case he was dangerous, which is weird to me. But look at this. You can see in the upper left-hand corner here, he starts defacing or damaging some scooters or bicycles or something. You see him kicking these things. And so they keep walking towards him while he's doing this, while he's kicking and destroying property. And it looks like the victim here may have said something to him or tried to talk to him. So he comes back around, starts yelling at the victim, and yeah. So this is after they've cut out the murder, but he murders him right there on the security camera. And you can see him come back over and threaten the girlfriend before leaving. So, look, this is an awful thing that happened. There are awful murders that happen every day. And I saw someone point out on Twitter today that it's always weird. I think it was Clifton Duncan said, it's always weird when you see like which particular murders the media takes hold of and talks about and pushes out there. And this one I think is kind of unusual because it doesn't fit their usual narrative. And so I was a little shocked to see it in the mainstream news. But because everyone's talking about it, it really made me think about some of the things about that I learned when I was in social justice. So let me stop sharing this, and I just want to tell you a little bit about the guy who was killed. I've also seen people online saying, you know, you shouldn't mock the dead. And uh, I agree. So I actually haven't seen the mocking. I've just seen people responding to it. I haven't been online a lot in the past couple days. We've had a friend from out of the country visiting us. So I may have missed the mocking, but if there were mocking happening, I agree. I don't actually think there's any use for that. And I think it turns you into kind of it's a dangerous step towards becoming monstrous like the monsters you want to fight. But I don't see anything wrong with talking about what happened and trying to learn from it. And so I did see someone in my comments saying, this person just died. But I guess the implication was, how dare you talk about it and think about it and what might have led to it. And I absolutely reject that. Of course, I'm going to think about what led to this. And I think there's a larger point to be made here about social justice ideology and woke ideology as it relates to getting us to shut down our survival instinct and our gut instinct. So this guy was in social justice. He was a well-known social justice activist. He was a white guy named Ryan Carson. Here's a headline from NBC News. Brooklyn activist stabbed to death in a sidewalk confrontation after attending a wedding. Ryan Carson, 32, was stabbed multiple times in the chest in Brooklyn's Bed-Stuy neighborhood Monday, New York police say. So we'll just read through some of the basic facts, and then I'll tell you what it made me think about. New York City police arrested a suspect in the fatal stabbing of a man that was caught on surveillance video early Monday in the Brooklyn borough. Ryan Carson, 32, of Brooklyn, was killed in the Bed-Stuy neighborhood shortly before 4 a.m. Monday, police said. Officers found him with multiple stab wounds to the chest. He was taken to a hospital and pronounced dead. Now, something interesting. This is one of the newest news updates where they've actually arrested the suspect. But when this first went viral 2 days ago, this news story, every single news report I was seeing said the police do not have a description of the suspect, which is insane because there's video of the suspect. And also there were witnesses there who could see what he looked like. And I think that itself is a sign of something wrong in the world, in our media, that we've gotten to this place where we're used to it. If the mainstream news doesn't talk about the race of the suspect, it's usually because the suspect could be black. They're definitely not white. If it were a white suspect, they would say it right out. And we're at a place where that's just sort of normal, where they hesitate to identify people, not just when it comes to race, but they don't even now. I don't know if you've noticed this, but in news stories, they hesitate to say if it was a man or woman because they don't want to offend, a trans activist somewhere. They don't want to assume gender. When some of these kids go missing, some of the trans kids I've seen that have gone missing or run away from home, they will refrain from putting the gender on the missing notices, or they'll pretend, they'll say, even if it's obviously a biological girl who's trying to look like a boy but doesn't pass successfully, and it would help to know that this is a girl, they will say missing boy. They will go with the chosen gender identity. I've seen that before. That's a crazy world. Like, do you not care about being accurate and helping to find missing people and find perpetrators of violence? And it helps to be specific and to live in reality. So that itself was weird. But so now they found the suspect. They've arrested the suspect. So we'll continue. An arrest was made in connection with his death. Oh yeah, see this photo? They put this photo out, and in all the news reports, it had the photo there, and it said the police do not have a description with the photo there. Anyway, an arrest was made in connection with his death, police said Thursday morning. The suspect was identified as 18-year-old Brian Dowling of Brooklyn. He was charged with murder and criminal possession of a weapon, police announced. At a media briefing Wednesday, New York Police Chief of Detectives Joseph Kenney said investigators had developed information about a suspect and were trying to establish probable cause to make an arrest. He said that after Carson was fatally stabbed, the knife-wielding man also kicked him in the chest. The assailant then threatened to stab a female companion who was with Carson and spat in her face before he fled. The man can be heard telling Carson, "I'm going to kill you right now." And Carson is heard telling the man, "Chill, chill, chill." Now, a couple of things about Carson. He worked for the nonprofit New York Public Interest Research Group, which, according to its website, launches public education campaigns to produce policies that strengthen democracy. This is from a video he did where he was advocating for safe injection sites in New York City. So this is one of the social justice causes. They believe that the best way to deal with, increasing drug addiction in cities is to give people needles, is to give drug addicts needles and give them places where they can shoot up drugs. And I just say that to lay out kind of where he's at, what his thinking is, what belief system he's a part of. I would argue he's definitely a part of my old belief system of social justice. I think he's completely wrong. I don't think that's the way you help addicts. I don't think that's the way you reduce addiction. But I'm not arguing that he's well-intentioned. I have no idea. He could be very sincere and think that this is what's going to help. In a statement about his death, the nonprofit group said Carson, a longtime campaign organizer, was killed in a, quote, random street encounter near his home. Even the mayor has commented on it. That's how big this case has become. Mayor Eric Adams called it an incredibly tragic case, and he thanked the NYPD. Here, I'm going to stop sharing. Now, there's also stuff that shows his girlfriend who was with him, who has been, she's worn all ACAB shirt. If you guys don't know what that means, they became very popular in the past few years during the defund the police movement. And it means all cops are bastards. And so here you can see she's also posted a lot of stuff. She's very pro BLM, pro defunding the police. So they're both solidly in the social justice square. Here we go. What is ACAB? Meaning explained as Ryan Carson's girlfriend, Claudia Morales, comes under fire over viral pictures. And so there were photos of her wearing ACAB. She also put that in posts where she ranted about the police, talking about different protests that she was in. And so let me see if I've got this where we can talk about this. The term, which means all cops are bastards, is a critique of the role the police play in society. The term ACAB is also known to generate antipathy towards cops. While the acronym has carried a nuanced meaning since its inception in the 19th century, during the BLM movement, the term divided the society as some viewed it as an expression of anti-authoritarian solidarity, while others saw it as an aggressive stance that caused more problems than solutions. And so there's more of this. You can go and read it. Andy Ngo has been reporting on it. You can read more about their beliefs and the kind of posts they were doing. But in short, I think that they both were of my old belief system, which is social justice or woke. And when I watched that video, there's something that stood out to me immediately, which is, why would any rational person walk themselves and their girlfriend towards potential danger at 4 a.m. in Bed-Stuy, which is a pretty dangerous part of Brooklyn? I lived there briefly when I was in New York. I lived there with a friend. Why would you walk towards potential danger, especially when you see him destroying property and stuff? He doesn't look like he's in his right mind. And it made me think of something that happened to me, and I've know other people who've been through this process, When you get pulled into the social justice ideology, one of the first things they do is they start to not deprogram, but they start to reprogram you in the way that you think about things. And you can see this in some of the stuff we've talked about before, where they redefine words and they get you to accept new definitions of terms. So they redefine racism for you. They say racism equals prejudice plus power, because everything in this ideology is based around power. They worship power, they want power. So they say racism is prejudice plus power. Therefore, if you're not in one of these identity groups that we are calling powerful or oppressors or the privileged, well, then it's impossible for you to be racist. If you're not white, basically, they say it's impossible for you to be racist. So they teach you all this stuff. And they teach you, if you are a white person, that you are born with or that you acquire from society, this what they call implicit bias, that you are naturally, it's almost like it's analogous to, in some religions, well, in Christianity, it's analogous to being born with sin. But this is all race based, and they dole it out based on, they say it's doled out based on what race you are. So if you are white, they say you are implicitly biased, you are implicitly racist. And one of the things they do is they start to get you to, what's the best way to describe this? To basically short circuit your survival instinct and your gut instinct. They will start telling you that if you're in that exact same situation that Ryan Carson was in, and a guy walks by at 4 in the morning and you feel any sense of unease or that this might be dangerous, that is your inherent racism because he happens to be black. Now, if it were white, you can listen to your survival if he were white, you can listen to your survival instinct and you can go the other way. But because he's black, it would be racist for you to listen to that your gut instinct is just inherently biased, inherently prejudiced, inherently racist, and that you are just assuming things because he's black, and there's nothing to pay attention to here. This actually happens. I know some people who are not in woke. When I posted about this, most people understood what I was saying, but there were a couple people, I think because they were never in woke, they don't understand it. It really teaches you to short circuit your gut instinct. That it tells you your gut instinct is flawed. That your gut instinct is racist, sexist, homophobic, all these different things. And so I fully believe this guy walked himself and his girlfriend into a dangerous situation because he's so deep in this belief system that he's a part of, that he's thinking it would be racist not to. It would be racist not to. I have to walk that way. It's like proving something to himself and the world that he's a good person, that he's not making assumptions. And you can imagine this can cause a lot of harm. It's very dangerous to short circuit your survival instinct, to assume that your survival instinct is flawed, that it's inherently racially biased or biased towards a certain sex or a certain race or a certain sexuality. It causes you to put yourself in situations that you might not otherwise put yourself in because you're so afraid of being the bad thing, being the thing that you're not actually. So it made me think of something that happened to me. I've told this story before, but it's been a while. So any new viewers, you probably haven't heard this. When I was first being pulled into woke, or back then we called it social justice. When I was first being pulled into it, it was at college, and this was the late 90s at Duke University, and I mostly started picking it up through my minor. My major was in biological anthropology and anatomy. At that time, it was not in the hard sciences. I was not getting it in those classes. It's there now. It's all over anthropology now. We just did a video about that. But at the time, it wasn't in that. My minor was women's studies, and as part of my minor, I was taking classes in critical race theory, queer theory, um, and a lot of feminist classes. And so I was learning these new definitions in those classes. I was learning that it's impossible for a woman to be sexist towards a man because a woman is part of a group that doesn't have power. We're oppressed, right? We're victims. I was learning it was impossible for a Black person to be racist towards a white person because they're not in a group that has power. And everything in this ideology is collectivist. It was telling me you have to look at people not as individuals, but as members of these identity groups and then judge if they're in a powerful group or not based on their race and their sex and everything. So I was picking it up in my minor in those classes, but I was also picking it up in Amnesty International. And so I was really involved in Amnesty International at the time. I ended up becoming a state death penalty abolition coordinator for them later. But when I first got to college, I was going to some of their conferences. I went down to Florida for a college conference for Amnesty International, and that was where I took my first dismantling racism training. Now these are very common now. At the time, I don't think it was that common unless you were at some kind of university. But now they have these in workplaces. It's incredible. They have them in elementary schools. This where they're basically programming you like a cult. You go in, it's called dismantling racism. They have other um, names for these kind of classes, but it's where you go in and you just get like the really hardcore social justice stuff piped in for a short amount of time. Like they're hitting you with everything, the new definitions, your implicit bias, your white privilege, your male privilege, etc. And so I had just gone through one of these intensive dismantling racism trainings, and I had come back to Duke, and I was thinking about all this stuff, and I was thinking about my implicit bias and my white privilege, and I had read Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh, and I was becoming a true believer in this belief system and wanting to do something about it, wanting to do what they say. This has become very common now. You hear it, but back then it was pretty rare. But they say, I wanted to do the work. I wanted to divest myself of my white privilege. I wanted to help change the society and the world. And they were telling me this world is thoroughly racist and it's systemic and you're part of the problem. And, here are the things you need to do to be a part of the solution. And so one night, my friend and I it was pretty soon after that training. A male friend of mine, he and I were walking back from a Mexican restaurant. He was just a friend, not a boyfriend. Some people have asked because when they hear the end of the story, they're like, "Why didn't he do anything? He's just a friend." I didn't know him that well. We had been there hanging out with other friends. They had already gone back to campus. He and I were the last two, spent some time talking. We were walking back to East Campus, if you know Duke's campus at all, which at that time was like, and now I think is even worse, like the bad part of town of Durham. And so it was late at night and we were alone on a deserted street, a back street. And at the end of the road, we see this huge guy, happened to be a Black guy, huge guy, coming towards us. We had been drinking, we were a little tipsy, but I understood that he said, "I'm going to F you up." He said that. He said that from the end of the street as he's coming towards us, intent, like focused on us. We kept walking towards him, just like this guy in the video. And in the years since then, when I've tried to think what was going through my head, it was it was almost like everything was in slow motion, and I was really like, "We should turn around." I was thinking, "We should turn around, we shouldn't walk towards this guy," but there was that other new part of me, that little social justice sensor in my head that was, like, interrogating myself in that moment and saying, "Are you just thinking this because he's Black? Are you just thinking, what if he thinks, you're racist because 'cause you're turning around and he sees you turning around? What if he doesn't mean anything? What if he's just drunk?" My brain was like and I'm still walking towards him as all these thoughts are going through my head. Crazy, right? Yes. To avoid the guy would be racist. Yes. They had just planted this thought in my head. It was fresh. And I was thinking in this really racist way, actually, that social justice and, they impart these really racist ideas into the heads of young white people where they're like, um, this racist idea of, oh, he's just misunderstood, this sort of like soft bigotry of low expectations thing, a little bit of that, but also this sort of just not holding him to the same standard that I would someone if he were white. If it had been a white guy at the end of the street saying that, we would have just turned around. But it's this weird condescending, pitying, thing and not wanting to be a bad person. I should tell you, I was very young when this happened. I wasn't as old as this guy that this happened to this week, Ryan Carson. I was 17 or 18. Yes, I was drinking before I should have been. I think I was 18. Anyway, we continued walking towards the guy. The guy meets up with us. He starts telling us he has a gun. He's going to kill us. He's telling, lots of swear words. I'm going to fucking kill you. He's gesturing towards his pants. He has sweatpants on. I couldn't tell if he had a gun or not. And I was scared, obviously. And he starts asking us, do you have a car? Give me your car keys. Unless you give me money, give me car keys. I'm going to kill you. I didn't have a car. He made me go through all my pockets. I didn't have any money on me. I had an ATM card and I had my keys, which had a bike key on it. I was like, well, I have a bicycle. He's like, he decides we're going to walk to campus together. We're going to stop at the ATM on the way. You're going to get out money for me. And then we're going to walk to West Campus and get your bicycle. So West Campus, quite a walk. We start walking with this guy and, he just starts ranting. He was clearly on drugs. There was it could have been meth. There's a bad meth problem now in some parts of Durham. Could have been crack. Who knows? But he was clearly on something. He starts ranting about us and saying all these. He's the one making assumptions. That's what's funny, right? He's like, you know, you white people this, you white people that. He's saying stuff like that. You college kids this. He clearly had a lot of hate for people from out of state who were there at Duke. Um, you're all like this, you're all like that. He didn't believe I didn't have a car, for example. He thought we had a lot of money. At one point, I did chance to say to him, "I'm sorry, you should have picked someone better dressed." I did say that. I did have a little bit of smart ass still in me. But the way he looked at me and what he said to me after that, I can't remember what it was specifically now, but I do don't do that again. Again, this whole time we're walking with him down this street, he's threatening to kill us the whole time. My friend wasn't saying anything at all that I remember. He was very quiet. He was more drunk than I was, I think. And we got to like the main intersection where the ATM was going to be on this road if we made a right, and it's lighted. We finally got to a lighted street, like one of the main streets by East Campus. And he's telling us at one point he said some crazy stuff. He looked at me and said he liked the way I look, which was the first time I realized I hadn't even thought about the possibility of rape. I had just been thinking about the threats he was making, which was murder. um, he also asked me if I died tonight, did I think I would go to heaven or hell? And I told him I didn't know. But the weird thing is when he was making all these accusations about us and, what you're like, what you college students are like, and I, in my social justice, my, reprogrammed, I'm a good person. I'm fighting the good fight against systemic racism. And, I start telling him some of this crap I just learned at this dismantling racism training. I'm just trying to find things to humanize us, humanize the two of us. So Nothing happens. And I'm like, I can't remember what I said, but I was rambling about the stuff. I've learned about how racism equals prejudice plus power. I probably said something like that to this guy on crack. Like, you know, I'm like, we don't think that about you. We don't, it's just completely like, I know about systemic racism. I've learned about it. I'm sure you've had a hard life. Like, it was this sort of just let me appeal to him with this social justice woke crap I just got injected into me. It was so dumb. Now I can laugh about it all these years later. But anyway, when we turned down this lighted street, there were campus police going by. They usually patrolled around East Campus. Again, that was like the campus that was less safe. And they threatened us. He said, if you make any wrong move, I'll shoot you. This whole time he's gesturing like he's going to pull a gun out any second, right? If you make any wrong move, if you try to get their attention, I'll shoot you. So we turned down this lighted street and we're like walking to the ATM, and we get to a red light and there's a campus police who stops there at the light, and it was like slow motion. My friend turns and looks at me. I look at him. He just starts running towards the police car. And then I like look up at the guy and he looks at me and I start running the other way. And the cops, like within minutes, there were several police cars, campus police and the Durham police. And they got him. I was just running. I couldn't see what they did, but I stopped running because they got him on the ground. They pulled his pants down. He didn't have on any underwear. He also did not have a gun. And they started berating us, actually. One of them did. He starts making similar assumptions that this guy was just making. He's like, you college kids, you're always giving these people money and you're always, and I'm like, he said he had a gun. Like, he's like, he doesn't have a gun. They asked me that same cop asked me for my address, my campus address, which I looked down at the guy. The guy's there right next to me on the ground, and they've got cuffs on him or whatever. And I was like, I don't want to give him my address next to him. And he was like, give me your address. He made light of my concern. And so I gave him my address, and that guy, the perpetrator, had heard everything. And he said, now I know. I remember he said, now I know. So afterwards I was like kind of jumpy for a while because I thought, I don't know, what if that guy tries to find where I live or something? But anyway, this is a long time ago now. But this story, I've thought about it a lot over the years, and the way I've thought about it changed, obviously, when I left social justice. And the way I started thinking about it in the long process of getting out of woke, getting out of social justice, when I would think about that story, I started realizing, first of all, how ridiculous that I wanted this guy that was threatening to kill me, this crackhead or whatever, to know that I wasn't uh, making any judgments about him because of his race. So much so that I continued to walk towards him, even though it was well after midnight, dark, deserted street, dangerous part of town, and he said, "I'm gonna F you up." Like, I just kept walking. And, I'm grateful to God that nothing happened to us that night, of course, and I've thought about it as kind of a warning sign. Like, this story for me, it's the first thing I thought about when I saw this stabbing, because I put myself in that guy's shoes, and I was thinking, like, what was he thinking? Because now I've learned to listen to my gut instinct. It's not always right, but a lot of the time it's right, a lot of the time. And so you start to develop trust in it, or faith in it. Faith might be a better word, to just listen to it just in case, because of how many times it has been right versus how many times it's been wrong. And I tried to put myself in this guy's shoes, and I was thinking, yeah, I think I know what his mindset was. I think if a person spent as long in social justice ideology as he did, and what he was apparently a very sincere, true believer. In fact, I've seen reports coming out now where his friends are saying that he wouldn't, if he were alive, he wouldn't have any harsh words to say about his attacker, his murderer, that he would want people to have empathy and understand, I guess, uh, that it's not his fault. I don't know, that it's systemic racism's fault. And it made me think about, in general, how this ideology, there's so many different things you can talk about when you talk about social justice or woke. You can talk about what it is, what the belief system is, what it's organized around, power, what it worships, power, what it uses, which is identity. You can talk about how it presents itself and operates in the world, which is a lot like a cult or a religion, or a lot like a personality disorder. But you can also talk about the effects that it has on people who are in it. And it has so many negative effects on people who are in it. And the longer you stay in it, the more negative effects it has on you. It makes people depressed. It makes people resentful. It makes people full of anxiety. It makes people self-censor to a point where they don't even know what their real beliefs are anymore. They're just saying what's approved to say and not saying the things that aren't. They're not even thinking anymore. It makes people fat. It does. That's the fat positive side of it, if you're in that part of it. It makes people mentally ill. It keeps people mentally ill if you're in the mental health justice part of it, where it tells you your whatever mental health issue you're dealing with is your identity, and that makes you an oppressed person. So why would you wanna get better, right? But one of the things it does is it also disables your gut instinct, your survival instinct, which some people online said, it's kind of like a form of grooming. It is. It's a form of grooming. It teaches you, it trains you, it programs you not to look for red flags, not pay attention to red flags, to actively mistrust red flags, to assume that your gut instinct is inherently biased, to assume that your survival instinct is bad or morally wrong. And I think that's evil, what it does to people. And I really don't think this guy, I mean, I don't know, they came from a wedding, maybe they'd been drinking, he wasn't in his right mind, I don't know. But I really don't think if he had not been so caught up in that ideology, I can't imagine him not getting that gut instinct of like, "Hey, maybe I should not walk myself and my girlfriend down towards this seemingly unstable guy who could be dangerous, who could be a threat on this deserted street at 4 in the morning in a dangerous neighborhood." So the point of all this is if you're a young person who happens to stumble across this video for whatever reason, or maybe you're an older person who's still in this ideology, I would just ask you to think about the evolutionary function of your gut instinct, of your survival instinct, and think about whether the ideology, the woke ideology, the social justice ideology, if you believe in it or parts of it, think about whether it serves you at all, if it's in your best interest to convince yourself that your gut is flawed, that your gut is bigoted. I hope that makes sense. It took me a while to kind of pick through those thoughts. Uh, oh, great. Deb Fillman's here. Hi, Deb. She's in the backstage. Give me 1 second. Just let me, that was a bit of a ramble. Let me see if I missed anything in the chat. And if not, I'm very excited to bring her on. Okay, let's do it. Please welcome Deb Fillman from The Reason We Learn. Hello, Deb.
Hello. Thank you for having me here. It's always a good day to go see Keri and come on your show.
I'm so glad you're here. I always enjoy talking to you, and uh, all we've talked about so far. So the first hour, I was talking about this case, which you saw my tweet about it, and I sort of laid some of that out. I was talking about this case, Ryan Carson, who was
Sure.
murdered
Mhm.
in New York, and
Yep.
I also shared my own experience when I was in college, having just come from a dismantling racism training and being held up by a guy uh,
Yeah.
who, I, anyway, the short version, they just heard the whole story, but the short version was it was the middle of the night. My friend and I were walking back to campus from a restaurant. This guy starts approaching us from the end of a deserted road and says, "I'm going to F you up."
Whoa.
And we kept walking towards him because my brain was seriously going, but he's black. Would it be racist to turn around? Am I inherently biased? Do I think it's dangerous just because I'm racist? It's crazy. It sounds crazy to say now, but I was young. I was like 18. And we kept walking towards this guy and ended up having a very traumatic experience because of it. They heard the whole story. Thankfully, nothing too
Yeah.
bad. The cops caught him. But it when I saw this Ryan Carson thing, I didn't tweet that personal story, but it made me think of that. It brought me right back to that
Yeah.
because I was thinking, why would a person walk towards someone at 4 in the morning with his girlfriend, walk his girlfriend that direction too, who looks like they might be dangerous on a deserted street in a dangerous neighborhood? And I think it's because he's turned off his gut instinct, or he's convinced himself his gut instinct is racist if the person it's pinging on happens to be black.
Yeah. And this is something that, believe it or not, you don't have to be, for lack of a better term, you don't have to be woke. You don't have to be someone who's gone through all kinds of, training and implicit bias to have this kind of reaction. It is so omnipresent in our culture to not be racist. It has been my whole life. I'm older than you are. And I don't remember a time when it wasn't impressed on me that the last thing you would ever want to be called,
Yes.
right, was racist, or more to the point, judgmental. When I was growing up, the big thing was don't be judgmental, be open minded, be tolerant. Those were kind of the watchwords. We didn't have some of the words that are used today. So it was more like, don't be judgy, don't be judgmental. So it was almost a hallmark of being enlightened or intellectual or, smarter than educated, right?
Mm,
That you would try to see other people's point of view or not prejudge, not be prejudiced. And even though, like I said, I didn't have any interfering with my gut instincts, that kind of programming is really powerful amongst educated people, for lack of a better term, which the vast majority of Americans are at this point. I mean, I shouldn't say educated. We've all been schooled. Let's say we've all been
yes.
schooled to a certain level, and so we've been pulled away from those instincts. And then you have what I discussed with JD Haltigan the other night, biological predispositions. I know it's taboo to talk about, but we have personalities that we're born with. Some of us are more skeptical than others, just innately. Some of us are uh, really outgoing and giving and soft-hearted innately. That we have different traits that are sort of in us to be amplified, if you will, by these messages. And he made that point that there's no way to look at a child and know this is a tender heart. This is more of a reticent kind of person who
Mm,
is naturally less trusting. Now you put those messages on top of the tenderhearted or the person who's a little bit more, accepting. And you get, I believe, Orion Carson. So in other words, I think it's a combination, probably heavily weighted towards the programming side, but in all likelihood, he was described as an artist, a writer, a poet,
yes.
a type of an expressive
Sensitive.
person, a sensitive person. So what do we know about people who have those talents and have those proclivities? They are more likely to be on that sensitive side of the, spectrum personality wise. And then when you come in with this messaging, it almost creates a bigger risk for that person. They're going to have to work harder to overcome it than somebody who would be more like, really? I don't think so.
Yeah.
And we've seen, I mean, come on, you've seen children even who are, some are rough and tumble and like, I'm not buying it. And some are people are like, okay, whatever.
Very
And
trusting and very
yeah,
good-hearted. Like sometimes I have
yeah,
parents who've reached out to me about their child being pulled into woke, which I'm sure you've heard from people like this too. And
yeah,
they'll say to me, "She's got such a big heart though, and she's got," and I'm like,
yes,
I know, because this
exactly.
ideology takes advantage of those people and their big
It
hearts."
does. And it takes advantage of people who are awkward in other ways. We now know there's a high percentage of kids on the spectrum who get pulled into some of these ideologies in part because, and especially the girls, uh, what we know about kids who are on the spectrum is, girls manifest their symptoms sort of differently. They tend to mask more. They tend to be better mimics of what they see other people
Mhm.
doing. And if they see that something looks acceptable in the sight of others, they're more likely to mimic it. Um, and so that's called masking. And boys tend to not be quite as likely to do that, or quite as good at it. Biologically, the female of the species tends to be more agreeable. I say tends, okay?
On average.
Because right, because our biological imperative is to reproduce and to nurture and to do things that are more aligned with seeking uh consensus or working collaboratively, things of that nature. We have not evolved past our biological imperative. I'm sorry to say, both male and female, that's still in us. And so when you see girls who are, I'm non-binary, I'm not gender normative, whatever, that too can be something that they are adapting to,
Mhm.
thinking this is a way to avoid some kind of a pain or to gain some kind of an acceptance. And I've talked about this before on my channel with other experts who suspect, and I think even the people at GenSpect are wondering, if not wondering, I think they've shown some, evidence in their research that there's a correlation. I'm not going to say it's causal, but there's a high correlation. And I think the thing about the Ryan Carson story that's so heartbreaking is that we are looking now at the video. We obviously don't have the full context of everything, but even the behavior of his girlfriend seems suspect. And you'll see
Mhm.
on the internet people saying she seems in on it. What's going on? She's not reacting appropriately. She's not screaming. She's not yelling. She's not doing this. She's not doing that. Now, I don't want to, I'm not there on the ground. I know the GoFundMe is a little strange, but I'm, leaving that out of there and just looking just at the behavior. I would caution people because while I do think it's weird, no question about it, that could be her manifestation of what was going on with him. In other words, remember,
Oh,
they have the same
they have
ideology.
the same ideology, and actually, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not so her behavior after I've seen people questioning that, and I think that's silly that she would be
Yeah.
in on whatever. I just
Yeah.
think, you don't know how you would react in that situation with
Nobody
shock,
does.
and this just happened. You have no idea. But
Right.
it's the beginning part where they walk towards the danger that's crazy to me.
Yeah, it is. And they're obviously very much in sync. And if you look at their background, why they're even together, I mean, they are aligned like philosophically, ideologically, they're aligned. So why is it that shocking that after this has even occurred, that what it is probably going on in the dissonance in her brain
Mhm.
of the whole entire episode, just like his dissonance. If you watch him, he's like backing up to finally run, and he does finally turn around and try to get away. And apparently he trips or something. And anyway, um, the amount of time it took for their brains to access the part of their,
Yeah,
cognition that said, we're in mortal peril here. We got to get away. And
yeah,
even for her to realize it has come to that, I think is on delay. It's like
it
if your
is.
computer is just spinning and spinning
Yeah.
because it's not connected to the internet
Yes,
properly.
because there's
I
all that
Yeah,
other stuff in the way that they're thinking and processing.
and they
It
have to overcome that to accept the reality in front of them. And remember, a key component of these ideologies is to reject observable reality.
yes.
And I keep trying to impress that upon people, that because they'll be like, no, no, they can't really be doing that. But no, they really, really are. In order for you to believe half of the stuff, more than half of the things that they believe, you must downgrade the importance or relevance of
Yes.
observable reality, and you must elevate the esoteric things. You can't, they're totally subjective feelings, emotions, perceptions, vibes, things that you can't measure, but you were told matter equally to the facts on the ground. Like, what do we know? It's 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm kind of inebriated. I'm not a great judge of what's going on. This guy looks a little dodgy. He's breaking into a car. Like, these are facts. These
Yeah.
observable realities that they had to decide were either equally important to, but I'm a nice person and he's black and I have to be whatever was going through their minds in a nanosecond, because it was not like talked out. And then, that reality were equal at least. And what our kids are learning now, starting as young as preschool, is that your feelings are actually paramount.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to talk to you today. I'm so happy
Mhm.
you're able to come on. Because in the example I gave, I didn't start learning this stuff until college. This was a different
Right.
time. It was the late 90s. I picked it up at
Yep.
university, and I picked it up specifically in one of these brainwashing seminars called Dismantling Racism. But now it's a different landscape. It's in the public schools. Kids as young as
Mhm.
kindergarten, elementary school are being programmed. And so, can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit about what kids are learning in kindergarten that relates to this?
Sure. So it begins with a simple question. What are your pronouns? Now, that may seem, agenda driven on my part or something, because I don't make any secret of the fact that I'm against teaching this theory to children. But think about the things a small child knows at the age of 6, like knows for sure about themselves.
Mhm.
And one of those is their sex. One of the things that they don't know it as an adult knows it. They don't have a concept of sexuality yet, really. I mean, people say all the time, I knew I was different. I don't doubt you knew you were sort of different than other kids, but in terms of your psychosocial and physical development, um, probably not at that level. So you still knew you were male, had a penis, female had, not a penis, whatever, vagina, whatever. These are things that was kind of like you could count on. 6 years
Yes.
old, I know I'm my mother's daughter's son, whatever. So you go into school, and this new person in your life, this new teacher, this new adult with a big smile on their face, they're so happy and excited to see you, and everything is just joyful. And probably your parents have talked it up because they don't want you to be scared. So, like, you're going to school, it's going to be great. And one of the first questions you're asked, if they know your name, it's written on your registration forms, is what pronouns do you want to use? And this is a kid who doesn't know what a noun is. This is probably a kid who isn't reading yet. Now, some kids do read in kindergarten, but let's say, the majority don't. So they're like, what is that? So now they have to ask.
Yes.
It's a generative thing. When we talk about Paulo Freire, there's a generative thing. Now, I've asked you a question you can't answer without asking me a follow-up. What's that? Or possibly it comes after a lesson about pronouns and what it means, which of course is you know, this newfangled definition of what gender means. The first time this kid's ever hearing that mom and dad may have made a mistake, doctor may have made a mistake. Now your reality is called into question. Moms and dads make mistakes that big? What? Now they're not able to articulate this. A little 6-year-old's not going to go, "Oh, I am so shocked to find that my mom and dad." No, but something is starting to destabilize inside in some kids, maybe
Mhm.
not all. But again, the kids who are highly sensitive, the kids who are maybe like counting on external information because they're neurodiverse to tell them what's what. And they're very literal and they're very concrete thinkers. And you come at them with, no, there's this gendered soul, and it could be something else that we can't see, touch, or feel, that even doesn't match what we can see and touch and feel.
Right, and
Sorry for the imagery, but
you need to decide. That's the way I describe it is
yes.
kids are now being told,
Hmm.
"You need to decide if you are trans or not," when this is something little kids never were introduced to or had to decide until very recently. In the past, it was if you had a child who had gender dysphoria, who had symptoms of gender dysphoria, feeling in the wrong body or something, it was such a small it wasn't even 1% of kids. It's such a
No.
small fraction
And not
of
at that age either.
yes.
That's very important to note that gender, like very young children, let's say age 6 through 10, very often experiment with um crossing over as far as like cross-dressing and wearing mom's jewelry, putting on high heels if it's a boy, whatever. This is so common. Now, a certain percentage of them might grow up to be gay if they're boys, and they're putting on mom's jewelry and stuff. But the vast, vast majority are just, who's the primary caregiver? Mom. Who's my biggest hero? Mom. So when a boy puts on, it's like, I want to be like my hero, Mom. I'm going to wear that. They don't know that jewelry is like a girl thing until a little bit later. And even once they do know, they don't really care. And who does care? Nobody cares. So in other words, it's completely normal for children of either sex to want to dress as dad. A little girl puts on daddy's shoes and shirt and, probably wants to shave. And this has nothing whatsoever to do with their own identity of their own sex. This is trying on different roles and seeing like what it's like. What does it mean? I want to be like this person. This is just a little bit of hero worship. That's all it is. And it's so normal that you'll see little boys want to dress up as Disney characters that are female. And again, it doesn't mean they're in the wrong body. This has been going on for hundreds of years, totally normal.
Yeah.
And so when you approach a kid within that stage, where it's so normal to experiment, but again, of their own volition and for their own internal reasons. Like I'm doing it, and I probably couldn't explain to you why I'm doing it when I'm 6, but it's just something that's coming out of me. And you come from the outside and say, you need to make a choice. And this is how you'll be known in the class. And this is how I'm going to treat you. And your mom and dad may have been wrong and dad may have been wrong. Very destabilizing for a certain percentage of children and for the children around them. So let's say the kids were like, okay, I'll expect, maybe I should be this, maybe I should be that, whatever. Then the kids who don't, what about the kids who don't? Now, day 1 might not be a big deal, but what about month 4, 5, 6, the next year, and they're still the boy or they're still the girl, but everybody else has been trying on different things. And then, it's like, but you're cis. Now that you've got this new label, you're in first grade, you're in second grade, and you've got your teachers, different people are talking about cis. And you're like, it sounds even like a slur as you say it. So even the kids who aren't pulled into it are now othered. And so this is just the first step.
And you don't get to have the fun, vibrant rainbow colors. You're not a part of that.
No, you don't. You don't get the swag. There aren't clubs for you. It's made very clear you're just kind of meh.
Yeah.
Not celebrated. We don't have pride for just being whatever the hell you are, which it used to be that like every day was be whoever you are. We didn't have Pride Day, week, month things for all these other things. What it does is it does absolutely separate children, emotionally, physically, everything. Then the next thing they're doing, Keri, is they are implementing surveillance programs. And what I mean by surveillance in this context is not that they're like spying on them, whatever. They are questionnaires, surveys. Some of them initially, when they're very young, they're filled out by the teachers or a school official who comes into the class. And what we found out is these are employees of private companies that work in this behavioral health, behavior modification industry. And they come into even nursery school, like preschools, and they observe the children. They have these questionnaires they fill, like seems to this, seems to that makes friends easily. All these questions that really scientifically don't mean a whole lot of anything. You and I as adults behave differently in different environments.
Yes.
We're more outgoing in some with some people, less outgoing with others. We're, we'll ask for help from some people, not from other people. It's not dispositive of our entire beings. And it certainly doesn't indicate anything about our mental well-being, because it's completely normal for a small child in a subservient position to a teacher or in a new environment to be, hesitant. They're a little, their survival skills are your program to be a little hesitant. Now, if that's going to be documented as, oh, there's, what's that? Oh, maybe there's an anxiety. Oh, maybe there's this, maybe there's that. Now we pull in supports. They're called systems of support. They come in to support the allegedly anxious child, or support the allegedly withdrawn child, or support the allegedly aggressive child, however those instincts you're talking about that Ryan no longer had. When you're a young child, and you may display those in a perfectly normal way for you because you're a kid, and it could be documented and go into a computer and a bunch of algorithms to spit out, give this kid support to be less however they are, when you have no idea the full context of why they manifested that day in that space or in that time. And pretty soon, then that kid starts getting a certain amount of attention, support, interference, intervention, questions, lessons. Now,
And
again,
now
Mhm.
and now it also becomes almost it could become part of their identity. I
Yes.
am a kid with aggression or whatever the thing is. I am a kid with anxiety,
Absolutely. You'll see
'cause
it in
they're
bios, and
oh,
it becomes something that when we went from destigmatize to normalize, we went from heal to I don't know what. This isn't healing. You're if you look, for example, if a child did have a bona fide, like, mental health problem, a kind of anxiety that goes above and beyond childhood. Let's face it, childhood is anxiety provoking at pretty much every stage. New school, new class, new teacher, new peers, kid sitting next to me bullied me at recess. I'm anxious. I'm not very good at math. I'm anxious. I mean, now again, your different neurological inclinations, you can be a little more, a little less. Today, tomorrow, this class, I'm less anxious. That class, I'm more anxious. But depending on who's surveilling you in that moment or who's documenting your every move and who's asking you, how do you feel right now? And kids don't know to say no. They're told the teacher says fill this out, or unless the parents intervene and say no surveys and you're going to sue you if you don't. And the kids asked, or they've gotten wise. No more surveys. Now it's post-it notes. You come into class, there'll be a little post-it deck and a thing on the wall that says, write how put it your name on the post-it and post it under the feeling that you have today. They even have meh
why
up
are
there.
they why are they
Your
doing this in
your
school?
temperature every class, every day, because the message they want to get across to these kids is your feelings are you. So remember it used to be I think, therefore I am? Well, it's now my reactions, my feelings, my affect is who I am. And on top of that, of course, they want to shape what those feelings are, and they're not shy about saying it. They are BF Skinner people. They truly believe that there's a stimulus and a response, that we're
Mhm.
bundles of nerves, and we can stimulate the child a certain way and then have the child respond a certain way. So if we want to modify behavior, we create certain dissonant experiences. So that's the stimulus, hoping to create an aversion so that they behave towards what we want them to behave towards. And if when they're talking to parents, it's all about emotional regulation, which you can't teach, by the way. When they're talking to themselves, when talking amongst themselves, it is about changing attitudes for the purpose of achieving sustainable development goals. If you go watch the video that Lisa Logan did last week about the IDGs, internal development goals, used to be sustainable development goals, was, now they want internal development goals. They want to develop our attitudes that they believe need to change so that we're less selfish. We're selfish and greedy. Did you know that? The reason that we're in our own way, Keri, we can't get rid of poverty. We can't clean up the environment. We can't solve climate change. We're not going to get people to stop driving their cars and eating those bugs until we can change those attitudes to be less selfish. But what does that actually mean in real life? What that means is your concept of self as an individual soul with inalienable rights,
Mhm.
endowed by your creator, whatever you believe that to be, that's got to go. And what I try to tell my audiences is that that idea of self is quite modern. And I don't mean modern 20th century, I mean enlightenment forward. Good luck going back to, let's say, the Middle Ages or any Roman, Greek, but the idea of the self as we understood it, as our founders put it down in writing in our
Mhm.
declaration, that's an enlightenment idea. And the post enlightenment, post modern sensibility, this Marxist, neo Marxist, really
Yeah.
quasi fascist ideology requires the death of that self. And we must be one with the collective. We must believe, as my friend Juana says, and this is what Václav Havel said, that the socialist realist concept of the self is that there can be the hero is toil, and toil is unthinkable outside the collective. So, in other words, work for the self. Anything you want to do for self-actualization, to become a better individual person, to live your individual bliss or whatever,
Mhm.
your dreams. Um, and I'm not talking about hedonism. I'm talking about an ethical life, right? Virtuous one where you don't trample on other people's rights and you expect them to show you the same courtesy, the golden rule, the 10 commandments, all that stuff. No, that's got to go. toil is unthinkable outside the collective in order for us to achieve this kind of utopia. It is exactly as batshit crazy as it sounds. And I wouldn't have believed it. I would have thought that people were, I was like, come on, really? But for listening to hours and hours of them talking themselves over there at the WEF, or listening to, reading some of the things that come out of UNESCO, which we just signed back onto thanks to Joe Biden in July. That's the United Nations Educational, Social, something, whatever. So what they're doing to our kids starting at the youngest age is that project. That's the project they're working on, is what's called transformational social emotional learning. Transformational social emotional learning, as opposed to just social emotional learning, is no longer individually focused on and responsive. In other words, this child is having a really rough time. I can observe that this individual kid is having behavior problems. They have problems at home. There's documented observable trauma in the home, etc. We're going to provide support for this kid. And they now have something called school-wide transformational SEL. And it's sort of the equivalent of saying, okay, that kid needs a wheelchair, and the
Okay.
wheelchair is getting him around. So you know what? Let's just give all the kids wheelchairs. What do you think is going to happen to the muscles in the legs of the kids who don't need wheelchairs? They're going to atrophy. They don't need them.
They don't
So
need
that
them.
the things they have going for them that they could otherwise use, they won't be able to use. So in your psychology, your ability to comfort yourself, to reason, tease out, is this a danger for me? Is this not a danger for me? Is going to be superseded by the feelings you need to be concerned about other people having because of you in the world. So self-awareness has even changed definition to a correct understanding of yourself in the society, in the collective, and what your roles and obligations are to the collective.
To the
Now, what do you
collective.
think what was going through Ryan Carson's mind was exactly that. Again, like a computer, lightning fast, because over the years he's been so trained, his neural pathways have formed to be like, that is my duty. I have to be self-aware of myself in space. I'm a white man. This is a black man. I need to, whatever was
Yes.
going through his head at the speed of an iPhone was what got him to walk that way instead of the other way. And so what concerns me is, if we're doing this to kids even before they ever get to high school or college, they're not going to have the ability to first develop those, discernment, survival skills, and figure out what is and what isn't dangerous. Someone else will have told them, or told them that it is more important to worry about someone else's perspective
And
than
it's
how you
moral.
feel.
It's
It is,
morally imperative that they
it's,
do, that they worry more
it is
about that person's feelings.
absolutely, your discomfort is not as important. Look at the memes that have been going up this week about pronouns.
Yeah.
Your discomfort is nothing compared to someone else's identity. Well, imagine that message repeated in many, many different ways, using all kinds of media and different teachers across 13 years of schooling. And what are you going to have on the other side? You're going to have a population, obviously not every single kid, but you're going to have a high percentage of kids with mood disorders, who are incredibly insecure, who are sociopaths, quite literally, because you separate someone from themselves and they have a predisposition and bad things happen. So we are interfering with the proper development of human wisdom, is how I
They
would put it.
they are I when I first saw you describe some of this stuff online, it made me think they're trying to train people to be little psychopaths and sociopaths where they're completely separate from. I mean, not that that's the intent when they go in, or not that the people who are sitting there are consciously like, "This is what we're doing,"
No.
but that's what you will be increasing, I believe. Um,
Yes.
I'm gonna show
That's the one I was
this
talking about.
tweet because I think you referenced it. So, this Pride UK org, they put this out 2 days ago. Learn to use they, them, and stop putting your own comfort and convenience before another person's sense of self, which is
And they don't
so.
mean another person either. Let's be very clear that it's tempting to think, or for people to say, but Deb, you just got done saying they don't want them to have a self. They want them to have a sense of self. Well, what do we know about the self under the rainbow, or the so-called progress flag? Is even those people only get to have a self if they're in perfect alignment all the time with the ideology.
With
If
the
you're just
ideology.
gay, if you're gay and you don't agree with this stuff, you're out.
If you're
If you
trans and you
challenge,
don't agree with this stuff, you're out.
it doesn't matter. So, and if you go back to 1984, and I wish I had my copy handy with me because I could pull out the reference. Um, one of the things that was essential to sort of break the brains of the people, even before they got sent to the Ministry of Love, where they made them say 2 + 2 = 5, and they never left, was, and Orwell talked about this, that you they must get you not only to believe these absurdities, but they need you to be able to believe things that contradict each other, like sense of self and perfect lockstep alignment with an ideology. Those
Yes.
two things would ordinarily cancel themselves out. So you have to look at watch their feet. As my
Yeah.
dad used to say, watch what they do, not what they say. So all their actions point to having no sense of self outside the collective. So this concept of self is just a marketing gimmick.
You're exactly right, and it's also and what I said about this is, it absolutely you to tell a person, anybody who tells you that you have to ignore reality and truth and your own sense of self. They're not saying it here, but your own sense of self in order to
That's right.
validate some other, ideological sense of self. Like they're not, it doesn't even hold up within this sentence because they're basically saying your sense of self doesn't matter at all. Especially if
Precisely.
if your sense of self doesn't go along with the ideal, if your sense of self cares about reality and what's true, like
Yeah.
you should subvert it. you know?
It, put it this way. What if we replace they, them with proper English? Learn to use proper English and stop putting your own comfort and convenience before another person's sense of self. It would still be wrong. Why? Because this here is singular, another person's singular sense of self. As your commenter pointed out, no one person is responsible for someone else's, not even any group of people are responsible for another person's sense of self. That's on you. That's
Yeah,
on you. And somehow when I was growing up, that was made abundantly clear to me. Your self-esteem is ultimately, ultimately your responsibility. In other words, no one's going to deny that if you suffered some kind of abuse or bullying or whatever during your childhood, it can impact the development of your sense of self. You could have low self esteem. We all acknowledge that reality, that environment does play a role. That said, those people who hurt you, those people who bullied you and abused you and called you names and defined you in negative ways don't get to have the last say if you say no.
correct.
Ultimately, how you feel about you is going to be how you feel
Up
about
to
you.
you.
It's
You're
going to be up to you,
responsible
and that's the
for your
pathway to healing.
you're responsible for your own emotions. My pastor has
Yes.
a good point about this. I thought he made an excellent point about how when you hear some of these woke people say things like, "You're invalidating my very existence," which is histrionics.
Not
It's
possible.
untrue.
It's not
It's not
possible.
possible. But he was
Mhm.
saying, in their mind, it is true because their existence depends on what you believe, what
That's
other
right.
people say and believe. Their existence depends on forcing you to comply with whatever they want. And if you don't, they're like,
Right.
they, if somebody, for example, says, uh, starts using he, him pronouns with me or saying Carrie's a man or whatever, it doesn't matter because I'm a woman. Like it's reality. I don't care. It doesn't change anything for you to do
No,
that. So say it all you
no.
want. It's not going to change me into
Exactly.
a man. But they are really, it's all dependent on words and other people's validation. Um,
Exactly, and that, so what they're working on right now in schools is externalizing the child's locus of control, so that they have a higher likelihood of doing that. And of course, the obvious reason why isn't to breed a generation of sociopaths. It's to make the population malleable.
yes.
And this has been going on since the beginning of public, compulsory education. If you go back and read the original progressives all the way back to the early 20th century, they said as much. They said as much. John D. Rockefeller said, "I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers." You had the guy. I remember. I saw coming front of mind now because I'm reading Thomas Sowell's latest book, which I highly recommend to everyone.
Mhm.
Social justice fallacies, and he goes into detail about the early progressives. I wish more people knew about the legacy and the lineage of the progressive movement, because it is despicable. And the public school system, just the government compulsion to attend school supremacy, as I call it, meaning the whole society organized around schooling, um, was intended to restrict the aspirations and achievement and movement and opportunities for advancement and reproduction of what they consider to be inferior races, inferior Eastern European immigrants and free blacks coming up from the South, and ooh, all the icky brown people. And the irony is that the people now who claim that you and I are white supremacists are spouting ideas that are just those ideas turned inside out. So what they did was they realized, well, that oopsie, we can't prove biological determinism is real. In fact, the evidence just started to mount and mount and mount that it was not dispositive, as more
Right.
blacks started achieving and doing better, and more Eastern Europeans learned English and started advancing. So they flipped it over again for political gain primarily and to maintain their elite status. They flipped it over to your permanent victims. So you're not biologically inferior, but the world will always be against you. And so we got to help you out. We just got to help you out. Yeah.
You know,
But it's the same thing.
you just made me think of, I've got 2 things pulled up here I wanna get your take on. Let me swap though to this one, because you just made me think of this, when you're talking about schooling and
Okay.
government compulsion to go to
Mhm.
government school. This may, I don't know how many people have this on their radar. It's on my radar because it involves my cousin's family, or, uh, her one of her kids is married into this family. Here, let me share this article. Have you heard about this German family in the US who was granted asylum?
And then they're
Uh,
kicking them out. They're deporting
yes.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
my cousin is Kelly Jo Bates.
Despicable. This is despicable.
This is despicable. My cousin's Kelly Jo Bates of the Bates family. You may know them from the television show Bringing Up Bates or United Bates of America. She has, 19 children, she homeschools, and one of her kids is married to, one of the daughters in this family, and so she's been, posting a lot about it, and so, anyway, I'll just read this headline. This is happening right now in the news. German family who sought asylum for homeschooling faces deportation after 15 years in the US. I didn't even know this was the case in Germany until
Oh,
this
you
hit the
didn't?
headlines this month. Yes.
Oh.
So if you guys
Oh,
don't know
yeah.
this
It's been
story,
illegal since Hitler.
let me just
It's
give
been
a
illegal. Mhm.
let me give a
Yeah.
brief overview and tell me what you think about it. But for anyone who doesn't know, they basically 15 years ago, this family, they started homeschooling their kids because of what their kids were learning that they disagreed with. And here, very specifically, it says they're evangelical Christians. They decided to educate their kids on their own after witnessing how their children's whole personalities changed and suffered health issues while attending public schools. The contents of their children's textbooks, which contain concepts against their religion, such as endorsing abortion and homosexuality, in addition to insulting family values, further soured the parents' faith in the public schools. And so they were slapped with over $7,000 in fines for taking their kids out of the public school. You're not allowed to do this in Germany. I had no idea. And the
Yep.
police came to their door to
Yep.
remove their kids from the home and
Yep.
force them to go to the government
Yep.
school.
Yep. They would
So
love to do that here. There are people at Harvard right now who want to do that here.
who to force I had no idea this
Mhm.
happens in
Yeah.
in European country. So they filed for asylum. This was 15 years ago, and a Tennessee immigration judge granted them asylum in 2010. Then the
Okay.
decision was overturned, and they were granted permission to stay under an order of supervision and indefinite deferred action. So out of the blue, so they've been under this indefinite deferred action for 15 years. They've been living here
Yep.
legally for 15 years under deferred action. They just got a notice that they have to pack up all their stuff within the next few weeks and get German passports, and their whole family has to go back to Germany.
Right.
And they still
Exactly.
have 2 kids who are not adults yet, who they're homeschooling here. So
Yep.
this is a huge thing. You can find information about them online if you want to help sign petitions on their behalf. It's the Romaki family. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I'll drop the article in the chat. So So you knew this was I had no idea. It shocked
Oh,
me.
yeah. I've tried to raise awareness about this because I'm a very unpopular person right now in some circles on the right, or the whatever you want to call it, the not left. Because I've told people how terrible schools are, and they're like, "So, school choice, right? So you support school choice?" And I'm like, "No." They're like, "But you want the kids to have to go to school?" I'm like, of course not. I support liberty. I support you not having to be forced to attend anybody's school. I support getting the government out of education altogether. I support you paying whenever, if you want to pay property taxes for other purposes, but not to maintain a system you're not going to use and that abuses your children. I support dismantling the whole thing in any possible way you can. And since it's managed locally at the state level, I think you should be able to, state constitutions can be amended. And I think I'm for education liberty. Why do I want half measures? I don't want half measures. They're like, we're making the perfect the enemy of the good. I'm like, if there is the perfect, why are we not going for that? And if the perfect is parents get to decide how their children are educated, just like they get to decide what they eat,
Right.
if we had a public feeding program that you automatically paid taxes into the minute we all did, and then you have a baby and you have access to it if you need it, if whatever, if you don't, you can feed them your own food, but you're already paying for it. So you might as well go get the government cheese. And, would you then say, please, can I have some, like a fraction of that back so I could go to the grocery store and buy like food that I want? Or would you say, why the hell are you taking money from me for food I don't want to eat? So why is it different with education? And then people talk about, well, your societal obligation to raise other people's children, and educate other people's children. Why? And aren't we creating a moral hazard there that, you can have babies and somebody else is going to take them? And we have that already with the food program for poor babies. So I don't want poor people to starve, and I don't want poor kids not to get an education. I just happen to have a little more faith in people, churches, charities, human
Mhm.
beings, private schools that have ginormous endowments they could possibly throw in the direction of poor kids. And I think if we weren't counting on the government, we get it done. We got it done before public school, and this nation had been around over 100 years, close, before we had public schools. So we weren't all illiterate. In fact, we had higher degrees of literacy, except for those people coming in who were immigrants from countries that were less free. How ironic. But in the free part of the United States, we had high degrees of literacy, even amongst farmers. So, but my problem is that by basically making a EBT SNAP program for school dollars. So, in other words, the government's still the middleman and saying, okay, take this over to other school. First, you got to count on that school's there and has a space for your kid. Secondly, that your kid can get in if they have any kind of competitive, admissions. Third, that it's the right school for that. I mean, there's all these variables, and it's a portion of money that may not be yours. So I gave this example the other night that I know what I pay in property taxes if all three of my kids were going to public school and they gave me what they're giving, let's say in Arizona, I would be rich as Croesus. I would have money I never paid in the first place, and I'm upper middle class. So imagine the people who are, well off. They're entitled to the same. I mean, they're going to be getting the same amount. They may or may not. In New York, they probably did pay it. In California, they probably did pay it, but in other places in the country, maybe not so much. So it's wealth redistribution, not always to poor people. And if you restrict it to poor people, now you're violating the rights of the other people. So at no way is this more freedom. This is just expanding government into the private sector. Now, when they did this in Sweden, they did this. They said, hey, let's have all different schools and so forth. But then not long after, they said, wait a minute, we need a standardized curriculum. We can't be sure with these tax dollars going to all these different places. We can't be sure that these kids are getting a proper education in these private spaces. So we'll have one standardized curriculum. Now, our Constitution currently prevents that, but they've been making end runs on that every year, and they're getting better and better at it. So all this mental health stuff is coming in through the Department of Education under the aegis of mental health.
Hmm.
Academics are gradually being replaced by behavior modification classes, SEL. Every class, math, science, English, whatever, is now SEL lessons. Even the literature they read is through the lens of, this
SEL.
behavior SEL. So how do they do that? How do they standardize the curriculum? With bribes. Say, oh, Mr. Governor, would you like the ESSER funds for the, remediation of mental health? You going to go back to your voters and tell them you're not taking the mental health cash? Really? You're going to get reelected without taking the mental health support money? Well, there's just one little tiny catch. You have to use it to buy this type of stuff. So suddenly you have a more standardized curriculum. Now, what happens when voters, as they likely will, and PACs and special interests start putting pressure on governments with these school choice programs to say, we want more oversight, we need more standardization, we need to make sure that they're not getting something and doing something that's different, and they're not getting this, and they're not getting, it would always be at the negative to the poor children who aren't getting, well, they're getting abused and deprived. And so the oversight will consist of regulations and modifications, even to homeschoolers. Suddenly homeschoolers, even whether they're taking the money or not, because some will take it, they'll be told, well, we have to standardize because tax dollars are going to defray this. Even if you're not
We
personally,
have to know what you're
we
teaching
have to
because
know what
you're
you're
using
doing.
public tax
You're using
dollars.
public money. And hello, this happened to the medical institutions. This happened to the colleges. Why I'm getting attacked when I bring this up and say, hi, what protections are y'all going to have? It's still running through the same government middleman. How are you good? Is this going to be the one institution, the one that got captured first, by the way? How is this? It was, I forget captured. It was created for the purpose of capturing the people. So how is this going to be the one institution of all the institutions that you somehow protect from government's overreach once it starts having tax dollars going to private entities? And then there's just that little tiny factor of it being fascist. I'm sorry, when did we become pro-fascist? We start calling it public-private partnership, and everybody says, oh, that's lovely. The public and the private are working together. No, a public and private partnership that would be good would be a private entity that says, we would like to donate free and clear, no strings attached. We just want to use some of our private endowment to do something for, the societal good, or we're going to have scholarships for these kids in these underprivileged areas, and they can come to our school. And, the most we're going to ask you is a tax deduction because, we're giving to society. Okay, fine. That could be called a public-private partnership. But partnership is kind of the key word there, where they're literally like this. And when a private corporation, and we have some big ones run by Kennedys, people with the last name Kennedy, Patrick Kennedy and his wife. There's a Kennedy Forum in New Jersey. Ooh, they own like a whole healthcare system that conveniently is partnered with the state to deliver mental health care through the schools, which is billed how? Medicaid. Taxpayer dollars going to the Kennedys. So do the Kennedys need taxpayer dollars to fund their stuff? Really? That's the kind of public-private partnership that is by definition fascistic. Now they might be like, hey, our interests align. Isn't that awesome? But at some point, the people with more guns could, if they wanted to, say, yeah, you're going to do it our way. Or vice versa. The people with more money could tell the people with the guns, nah, you're going to do it our way. And we, the sitting duck taxpayers who have no choice in the matter, what's going to happen to us and our kids?
Okay, there's a lot there. Let me try and pull some of it apart. First of all, thank you for the super chat, Pirate Tomsky, for 5 British lira. It's pounds. I know. This is a running joke on this show. 5 British pounds. Pirate Tomsky says, Deb, what are your thoughts on things like the Peterson Academy, which are starting to pop up, good or bad?
Oh, it all depends on the funding. So my attitude is the time is ripe for people to start schools, micro schools, academies, independent education. I mean, I'm not anti build a school. Okay. I don't love the notion that schooling is how we think of education. Education, it goes way beyond the 4 walls of any building. But I think if individuals with, certain ideas want to provide education to people and they want to do it completely independent of government and taxpayer dollars and actually shun them and fight against them and say my existence shuns what you're trying to do and rejects what you're trying to do, I am 100% for it. I don't even necessarily care what kind of ideology they have necessarily, as long as it's free and not compulsory. Free meaning they've decided it. This is the United States of America. If somebody wants to start the Bill and Melinda Gates Academy of the Greater Good, and it's totally funded by Bill and Melinda Gates with no public dollars, and progressive parents want to send their kids to this loony bin, knock yourself out. This is America. I don't think that we should have to pay for that, and nor do I think anyone should be compelled to attend. Yes, then it's great.
Sophia
like
says,
Hillsdale
I think
College.
he's not accepting government funds. Yeah, like Hillsdale. I did have a question. I started a couple of things.
Yeah.
So, artist Natasha, hello. I like your Lucille Ball avatar. Says, I get that school choice comes with strings, but but we have to start somewhere. So where do we start?
Okay, well, we
So what
don't
are
start
you
by going back.
arguing? Right, but so what are you arguing for?
So what I'm arguing for is that, and it's hard. I'm not suggesting it's easy, but I want you to recognize that it's equally hard to jump through the hoops to get the ESA account and do the things you have to do to get your kid into the school, whatever. I don't think that's easy either. Keeping tabs on what new regs are coming in and what's coming into the school after your kid starts at that new school you took with school choice dollars also is very challenging, time consuming. I would suggest that you front load your hard with building a small community of like-minded parents. By like-minded, I mean y'all want to get the hell out. You could have 3 people. You don't need 10. Even 2. And say, let's work together on this. Let's figure out how we can get our kids out of the current school and build something else for them for education. You're not trying to recreate school. Remember, education, school supremacy has made us think that education must be done in, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year. That's not true at all. So what you really have, if you have young children, your big problem is childcare. If you have older kids, your challenge then is, proper stimulation, proper socialization, like finding friends, finding ways to learn and access material. We got libraries, we got all kinds of community colleges that are open to teenagers. So my point is, you sit down and figure out what are the lifestyle challenges that I have that school is providing for, because they're not providing the education that your child deserves. Let's stipulate that as a given. If you're already pursuing school choice, then that is probably your mindset. So what is the lifestyle challenge that you face? Now solve that problem. Most parents solve it every summer some kind of way. So start there. How do I solve it for the summer? Is that scalable all year? If it's not, how could I figure out a way that would be? Do I have any relatives, friends, colleagues? Do I do shift work? I could do split shifts or something and share with somebody else. Do I have neighbors in the neighborhood that might want to work with me? Is there a micro school in my area? Should I start a micro school and become an entrepreneur? Oh, I don't know how to teach. You don't have to. Just because you're not a teacher doesn't mean you can't provide the materials that kids need. And kids are amazing as far as you give them books and you give them lots of blocks and you give them things when they're little and you read to them and you can get math curricula that just guides you along. You don't have to be a math teacher. We're talking about K through 5. After that, if you do that properly, which by the way, properly just equals don't get in their way with a lot of emotional gobbledygook pronouns and what are your feelings today? Then by the time they're 10, they'll do a lot more self-direction than you might give them credit for. Not every kid, but there are resources out there. There are YMCAs that have homeschool classes with actual teachers. There are co-ops. If you live in a rural area, it's a little more challenging, but I always tell people, build community first, solve the lifestyle problem first. And I know the next question I get is, but what about the money? They're taking the money. I want my money. I truly believe that when the money's not going to the public school, and they can't, remember, you leave, you pull your kid out, there's enrollment that drops. They're funded by how many butts are in the seats. So they will lose something when your kid isn't there. Now, they don't give it back to you, unfortunately, but if we saw enough of an enrollment drop and enough people, and by the way, homeschooling is exploding. So if it kept going, those lawmakers, those politicians who are trying to get elected are going to have a much bigger constituency coming at them going, I want my money. And remember, too, you're not the only one who pays for it. Childless people pay, too. Grandparents pay. Immigrants who are barely, on a green card and can't even bring their families here yet, they're paying taxes also, sales tax, et cetera. They're going to school. So we're all paying. We all have skin in the game. I, as a homeschooler, not only my property taxes, but all these other taxes. I decided my children's lives and souls were more valuable to me than that $3,000 a year that I'm paying in school tax. So do the math as well. Sit down, take your property taxes and whatever sales taxes you know in your state, go to education, get a number and and I want you to look at it, put it on a Post-it note, because you need to visualize that number and say, am I really sending my kid there or asking my government to go and start monitoring private schooling and getting involved in homeschooling and giving me potentially other people's money for that. Because that's essentially what you're saying. So my suggestion is that we need to step up and start solving the lifestyle problem.
It's I will say it's a revolutionary answer, but I like it. It's
I'm
scary.
a
I understand
revolutionary
why
kind of person.
I understand why it's scary.
It is
Um,
scary. I'll never tell you it's easy. Look, but I always tell people choose your hard, and here's why. My youngest, who's now the last one home homeschooling with me, is 15. She had to go to school kindergarten through essentially 6th grade. She was in COVID hit and she was in beginning of 7th grade. And it wasn't my choice. It was a divorce situation. I had been homeschooling her older sisters. Upon the divorce, it was like, you're sending them to school, no choice. I had a court order. I couldn't keep them homeschooling. Now, she's happy to be homeschooled now. She's even asked me to design her curriculum and all this stuff. But the school supremacy in her brain is so firmly set there. She thinks of subjects in silos so much that when I correct the grammar in an English assignment, like study guide answer to questions because they're not complete sentences or something, Mom, that's writing class. That's supposed to be in my writing section. That's not in my English class. Or in math, we had to go all the way backwards to
wow.
elementary grade level skills. This is a smart girl because she had to admit, even though she'd been getting A's in the school situation, it's like, I don't understand percentages and decimals. Can we do it over? So, and yet, even when I try to do that, there's this tug of war, and I'm having to fight against the sort of programming of what learning is that schooling gave her. So I tell people, if you have even a thought that you might pull your kids, do it as early as possible, because the longer they stay, even if ideology is not really the issue for you, even if it's just the academics are crap, my kid's not reading properly, can't do math, they can't write a coherent paragraph. The longer they stay, the harder your fight once you get them out.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's easy, but it's worth it. I refuse to let her go another year in a situation where they're not learning the academics and the love of learning, the curiosity, the just beauty of life that I wanted her to have for education. And on top of that, being trained to be victims of a stabbing late at night in
Right.
Brooklyn.
Being trained to just walk into danger. So I have something else pulled up. Do you have
And I
just a
know it's
few?
unpopular, and I know I'm gonna hate mail and whatever. It is what
That's
it is.
okay. Do you have a few more minutes to look at this
Yeah.
one other thing with me? So you were talking about transformative social emotional learning,
Yes.
and this is
There it is.
the website
Castle.
Castle,
I know it
and
well.
anybody can go here and read about
All
this,
there.
what
Yeah.
they're putting into schools, and so this is their page on transformative SEL, social emotional learning. Of course, none of this stuff was in the schools when I was young, so this may be new to you, it may be a shock to you that this is in the classroom, but, I wanted to scroll down here to where they say, "What does transformative SEL look like in practice?"
Yep.
So here's how they describe it. Transformative SEL grew out of developmental science and research on students' engagement, well being, academic achievement, and long term success. But in practice, there are currently limited options for evidence based programs and implementation models for transformative SEL. To address this need, Castle is leading collaborative efforts with partner organizations to learn alongside students, families, schools, and districts how specific practices, policies, and processes can best be implemented to achieve the goals of transformative SEL. Practices that we are learning about include opportunities for adults and young people to practice curiosity by teaching and learning from one another, instruction that honors and makes connections to students' lived experiences, that's a social justice phrase, and identities, social justice, and scaffolds learning to build an understanding of others' lived experiences, social justice, culturally responsive education and youth guided approaches such as project based learning and youth participatory action research, developmentally appropriate learning opportunities that engage students and adults in examining current and historical events, social norms, prejudices, and biases.
That's
This
critical theory right
critical
there.
theory, and how issues of race, class, and culture impact our society. This is all social justice.
The whole thing is saying we're experimenting on your children
Yeah.
to figure out how to better mold your children and reprogram your children. And I put a link in the private chat. If you want to pull that up, there's a couple sections that you could read. And I think you will see they're being even more bold in this other document that I have that's from
Yeah. Let me
UNESCO.
pull it up. This one last
Yeah.
one here I wanted to
Yeah.
hit. Opportunities for youth to use their voice and skills to examine inequities, and create solutions for social change.
Youth are going to create
Youth,
solutions who
they
know
are
nothing. They have no
they
knowledge.
they're turning kids into social justice cult members and
Uh-huh.
activists.
That's right. That's right. And but the how is the really sinister part. So they just told you we're experimenting or working alongside them. Now, in the link I gave you from
Okay,
UNESCO, they explain kind of why and how, and it is like bone-chillingly creepy. So, this is
hold
it's
on,
in
that
the
was the
private
wrong
chat.
link.
Yeah.
Hold
Should
on.
be SEL for SDGs.
Got it. Okay.
Why social yeah. And I've been trying to propagate this link. I've been trying to, read from it and talk about it for, at least a week because I think it's so important. So first of all, if you go up there, okay, so look at what it says. It says SEL for SDGs, education for emotional resilience. Now I want to say something this is very important. You cannot teach resilience. You cannot teach resilience. You cannot teach emotional regulation either. Your schools will tell you that that's what they're doing or that we're just trying to teach them emotional regulation techniques or strategies. We're just trying to teach them resilience. We just want them to be resilient. You cannot teach these things. These are things that children learn through doing and living and falling down and getting back up again. It can't be done in a workbook or a lesson plan or an exercise, group, single, individual, or otherwise. Just can't be done.
This is
Can't be done.
why I said to you on Twitter once, it struck me that they are going to be making little sociopaths because they're almost teaching kids like what's the correct
That's
response.
correct.
What am I supposed to display here? What
Right.
feeling am I supposed to mimic or whatever to pass this test? Like,
Right. Now, if you keep scrolling, you'll see that in this first paragraph, the sustainable development goals are not necessarily a set of consistent objectives, but rather a series of potentially conflicting goals. For from the perspective of the development agent, that means the teacher, anybody working towards the development goals. These conflicting objectives entail inconsistencies in actions and antecedents, I mean, things that lead to actions, needed to attain the SDGs. For example, eradicating poverty, a societal objective. Notice how they just blow right by that we all agree that we can and should eradicate poverty, might entail, at least in the short term, working the self to the point of compromising personal well-being. Now think about what that means.
wow. Compromising personal well-being. This is everything we're talking about. Walking into danger, forget about yourself, forget about your
But to
personal.
eradicate poverty, Keri, we might have to do that. And they now, mind you, personal well-being is another SDG. But they say another clear example of such conflicts is the slow progress or even resistance to climate change policies
Ugh,
because of the relationship across work choice. How dare you choose a job that might need you to drive to work? Economic growth and climate change. Thus, attainment of these goals may necessitate a balancing act. Development agents may consider multiple options and make trade-offs. Now keep going because this now it gets even creepier if you thought that was creepy.
this
At the
is
level
terrible.
at the level of this is UNESCO, UN. At the level of the individual and social collectives, what? These trade-offs and SDGs will be quite taxing because the conflicting goals are, in effect, inconsistent cognitions, generally referred to as cognitive dissonance or dissonance. According to dissonance theory, one of the most tried and tested theories in the behavioral sciences, again, they're treating your children like dogs. Behavioral science is not to be applied to humans. Inconsistent cognitions evokes aversive arousal state that leads to attitudes and behaviors aimed at reducing the arousal. Dissonance is constituted by two important social psychological processes, inconsistency among cognitions, a more rational phenomenon referred to as cognitive discrepancy, and the unpleasant emotional and motivational state that arises from holding two contradictory cognitions referred to as dissonance. That guy looks dangerous. And it's late at night, and I'm not a bodybuilder or a martial arts expert, nor am I carrying a gun. But he's Black, and I'm supposed to be tolerant and understanding, etc. And then these conflict. Which
Yes.
one wins?
That's what they're saying. They're saying, take the climate change example. They're basically saying, we know this is going to cause cognitive dissonance because we're teaching people that you shouldn't drive cars because that's bad for climate change, and we should all use public transportation provided by the government, of course. So you're all dependent on the government to get anywhere.
Yep.
You do that if you're a good person, and then
Yep.
but then you've got this other conflicting thought, which is, but as a good person, I want to provide for my family, and the best job
Right.
requires me to drive, and I'm going to have to drive a car. And you got these two competitive things, and they're trying to figure out how to get rid of this thing over here, so you
Right.
just fall in line.
And we have to get as many people as possible to shift their attitudes so that the number of people we have to use force against is much smaller than, than we might otherwise have to deal with. There is a comment here by Dion. I would love it if you put that up on the screen because that nails it. The aim of totalitarian education has never been to instill convictions, but to destroy the capacity to form any Hannah
Oh,
Arendt.
yes.
100%. That is exactly 100% what's going on. So, they go on to say dissonance unpleasant, blah, blah. I really would love it if people listening to this would do a little bit of, we did some shows last week, Christine Jones and I, about mental health-ism, which is basically what's happening now. It's like a new religion on top of the woke. It's like a denomination of the woke religion. But they are using the ideas of Skinner on humans when it is absolute garbage. Like you cannot train away human nature, human instinct. You can't. No, we have agency. We have dignity. Okay, whether you believe in a soul or not, the
Yes.
human is obviously like observable reality tells you that human beings are not like dogs and cats and pigeons and elephants and other trainable, even porpoises. Okay, we have agency. We have free will.
We have
We have free
consciousness.
will. We have right. So they have moved. They moved way back before even Dewey. They moved away from the idea of cognitive education, which is grounded in the acknowledgement of free will, which all Judeo-Christian, whether you believe in it or not, or you're just the person who founded America on Judeo-Christian values and principles, which we did. Okay,
Yeah.
you don't have to be a religious person to acknowledge the reality of that. The Enlightenment was born out of these ideas of the unique and sovereign individual with free will. And so that was cognitive education was required in order that the individual learn to make the best possible choices for their survival, but their virtuous survival, their ethical survival, their moral survival. And our founders, if you read their writings, will say we needed to be free to do what we ought, not to do what we want. And that requires that kind of cognitive education. They shifted in the end of the 19th century and they were very explicit about it. They certainly believed in science, science, science. We can analyze everything and then we can quantify everything. And human beings, we can study like animals. And they went to an affective model that we were just a bundle of nerves responding to stimuli like an amoeba or a dog. And that if we could just control the environments enough, and we could control the affect and train the responses to the stimuli, we
Yes.
could have a nice, malleable little population of people to keep
Of
control. Now, of
workers.
course, the children of Teddy Roosevelt and the others, in this movement, they were getting to go to Harvard and all these places where they would get a liberal education full of cognitive, information. But the rest of us plebs, we weren't supposed to have that. And so this is what we have. Now, what is remarkable to me, and I'd love to find out how or why or study this, is that it took them this long to be so effective. So 1897, let's say, they really begin in earnest. Here we are 2023, and there's still you, there's still me, there's still James Lindsay, there's still all these people who are like hell to the no, and your audience who obviously value education, I mean, it proves a couple of things. It proves that you absolutely cannot overcome free will and the human agency and dignity that's
Yes.
inside of each and every one of us. There's no amount of training that can do it. Look, Alexander Solzhenitsyn existed even in the
Yes.
Soviet Union. So you can't do it. We're all living proof. And uh and also that it takes a long time to be this effective. So it's going to take an equally long time to unravel it, because as ineffective as they were effective enough that there are those people, PhDs, master's degrees, representative in Congress, Supreme Court justice. I don't know what a woman is. I'm not a biologist. That are in positions of serious power who don't see the world the way you and I do, Keri.
Yeah.
They literally don't. They created, I don't want to say this because I don't want people to take me literally, but when you treat people like this, you create a subset of traits or values that are almost a new species. They do not see reality the way you and I do. They do not see value of the individual the way you and I do.
Yes.
We are the same species. Please don't
Yeah.
repeat that.
Yeah,
Don't make it
don't
seem
take
like I
it
said.
literally, but no, they do
No,
not
but
live in
it's
reality. They don't. They,
mm-mm,
it's like my pastor said,
no.
they actually, in some sense, they really believe you invalidate their existence if you don't
Yes,
speak
they
their
do.
ideology back to them because they only exist out here in the ether in what other people what the collective thinks and says, and you're a part of
Well,
that,
that's
and
why
you've
we say
gotta
cluster
yeah,
B. That's that kind of
yeah,
man-made cluster B, right? Because when you have you're hollow inside, most cluster B personality, they're deeply, deeply insecure. There's a hollow in there, right?
yes,
They are externally validated. And you've seen narcissistic injury, what that looks like, then
yes,
the rage that comes with it. So what you're seeing is that. And as I've said many times, you can cultivate this in people, especially people who have either a genetic predisposition or they have other things going on in their life. Their personality lends itself well, um, because we all human children start off self-absorbed by nature and by necessity, because we have to survive. So we need to like demand attention and demand that somebody feed us and care for us and so forth, and be cute or be appealing or be annoying or do whatever we have to do to
mhm,
get it, because we don't have the means to do it ourselves. So that is completely natural. What the schools are doing is halting that development and keeping us in a state of arrested development, and then scratching that, like irritating that toddler-esque maturity level, and you get what you see screaming in that place in Nebraska where the woman was like, "We need trans people. We need trans people." She just did
just
it for like
like they're
what?
possessed. A lot of people who are
Yeah.
religious describe them as possessed, and it seems that way because,
Yes, for sure.
they're not tethered to reality. But
And it's
reality
real.
is
It's not an act. It's not an act.
it's
They
not
really
an
feel
act,
like that.
but
Mhm.
reality will deliver them a wake-up call. I mean, I believe this, but I'm a believer, I'm a
Yeah.
Christian, and I believe, God has overcome the world. Things of God, if you are of God, you've overcome the world. I don't know if I'm making sense, with this verse, but, um, the way my pastor talks about it is this war, this culture war, this ideology war that we talk about so much lately because it's become
Right.
so obvious in the past few years, so apparent. It's hard to ignore it now. It's hard to stay asleep now.
Right.
And this culture war he describes also as a spiritual war, but also as a war with reality. And he says, you know,
100%.
if you are warring with reality when it comes to gravity and you jump off the top of a building, you will meet the consequences of reality very quickly. But
Right.
just because the consequences are delayed and take longer for this type of war on reality, if we deny the reality of biological sex, for example, we are still as a society going to meet those consequences. And these individuals out there screaming in the street, they meet those consequences all the time. I'm convinced.
That's right. And that's why I think it is important to talk about what happened to Ryan. obviously, our hearts go out to the members of his family and his friends and everything. I would
Yeah.
never say anything. I think it's just disgusting to dance on somebody's grave,
Nobody
but it's still
deserves
important.
that ever.
No, but it's still important to discuss and observe and come to grips with how that is evidence of a consequence of the fantasy meeting reality. And he's not the only one. There have been
Yeah.
several examples in the last several months of people who have made a choice like that. And if you've ever seen the movie, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo,
Yes,
I don't
it's
know if
been
you've
a
seen it.
while, but yes.
Okay, so you might recall there's a scene, and I don't want to spoiler alert. I guess I don't want to give it too much away, but there is a line in a scene where one of the characters comments on humans and how humans will walk willing when they know the person they're dealing with is a killer, they'll
Mm,
still like walk willingly towards that person, um to avoid seeming rude or to avoid that kind of social isolation that might come from being judged as being rude or mean or racist or something like that. And that movie was made quite some time ago. That's
wow.
not
You're
within the
so
last 4 or
right.
5 years. And that scene was really powerful. And like I said, I don't want to say more about who it was in the movie or anything because that'll give it away. But I remember watching it and thinking to myself, "It's quite a testimony." And I think he's right. And I had to look inside myself and say, "Do I do that?" And I don't think I do, but I think we all. And that's why I say let's not all be so quick to judge. Now, in that case, that's an extreme case, but I know for a fact there have been situations where I've been places and I've had to decide whether to cross the street or not.
Mm,
Just to cross the street because someone coming towards me and I was by myself, someone coming towards me just looked a little off. And I had that internal struggle for a couple seconds of, am I like, what am I
yeah,
doing?
yeah,
And now I will say that in 99% of cases, I have crossed the street anyway, but I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and tell you that I didn't have that little conflict. Now, if I who live in reality, A is A, I'm like, Ayn Rand's book is sitting here next to me. Like, if even it is a natural human thing in many of us. I won't say most or all, but it is very common. You don't need to be a woke person to have this. So that is exactly why. And it's especially common in societies that have been peaceful, have had peaceful coexistence, that do have pretty strict rules of engagement, laws and so forth, that we feel like there's an understanding that we have that we don't hurt each other, right? In this neighborhood or whatever. That is going to be more common and take those kids. And that is also, I believe, why you see some of this be more effective in affluent areas, in affluent neighborhoods and uh, sections of states and regions where you see the more middle class and upper middle class kids who are the ones out there screaming their little heads off and losing their minds. I think that's why.
yeah. Well, Deb, I want to thank you for coming on to talk about this. I would love to have you back on again
Thanks
for a
for having
deeper
me.
discussion. You guys, please visit the Reason We Learn here. Pirate, if you're still here, can you throw Deb's website link up in the chat? And we also are going to be editing the description below to make sure it's there. I think your show is linked, but it's
Thank
called The
you.
Reason We Learn. And
Mhm.
look, I wanted to end with this quote Dion put in the chat. She said, "Pause and remember, when you fight reality, you will lose every time. Once you accept the situation for what it truly is, not what you want it to be, you are then free to move forward." It's very young.
100%. And that, by the way, is also what I say to people when they say, well, how do we move forward if it's not school choice? Accept the reality that government is the problem and not your savior. And then you will know how to move forward. And I hope that helps. If you're interested in what I was talking about the stuff with Medicaid and the funding and all that ramble that I went on, that Keri was like, that was a lot. I will be going into detail and showing receipts for that on Monday night on my show on Dissident Dispatch. So if you're interested, tune in for that live at 7 p.m. on Monday Eastern time.
And the show, I just put the name of the show in the chat as well. The Reason We Learn with Deb Filman. Robert Lowry
Yeah.
dropped your Linktree link there.
Thank
Um,
you.
thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Thank you for, yeah, they are your enemy, not just the problem. Yes, I fully believe this.
100%.
Thank you
Yeah.
guys for hanging out with us this Friday. I hope you have a great weekend, and we will see you on Monday. Deb, thank you. Have a lovely
Thank you.
weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.